Hello everyone, and welcome back to day 2 of the MoneyLIVE Summit in London. You're here with the Fintech Times. My name is Tyler, and today I'm joined by Conrad. How are you, Conrad?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yes, we've had a busy morning. Unfortunately, our interview has been gate crashed by the royal family, who are doing something over the road. But yeah, it's been a good morning. It's been a good morning, and you're speaking later, aren't you?
I am speaking. I'm speaking about the target segment for the company I work with, which is sort of medium-sized businesses or medium-sized SMEs, which is a very underserved segment for the fintech sector.
Oh, well, it'll be a good panel, I hope.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, before we go on, Conrad, I think we should let our viewers know a little bit more about who you are and where you've come from. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Sure. So yeah, I'm Conrad. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Allica Bank. Allica Bank is a new bank focused on what we call established SMEs. These are in the UK, 500,000 or so fairly large SMEs rather than the millions of micro businesses, which have been a real focus for the fintech sector. Prior to my current role, I was actually a fintech founder. I founded a business called Funding Options. I was the sole founder of Funding Options, which is actually ranked in the fastest growing companies in Europe. But I stood down as CEO a couple of years ago, and now I'm enjoying being a wage slave again.
You join the rest of us. But that sounds like you've had a really interesting career.
I have, yes. I mean, there's many ups and downs in being a founder of a startup, but the ups are greater and the downs are greater. So yes, it's an exciting journey, and I'm a bit of a fintech veteran because fintech was only really coming out as a word when I started founding the business I founded. So I've been an interesting journey to be part of that.
When did you found Funding Options?
I got serious about it around 2013, but I was doing, kind of like writing business plans in my spare time before that. So it was a fairly early business, and actually Funding Options was focused on alt-fi, alternative lending. Okay. Which actually in its day was probably the hottest area of fintech. The world's moved on a lot since then, but back then alt-fi was the thing. So it was a very exciting journey.
Oh wow, well it's great to have you with us, Conrad. You talk a lot about, you just mentioned alt-fi, for example, and how that was, like, in its day, the real buzzword of fintech, shall we say. And, today we're looking at fintech and maybe a bit about, like, the individual segments of fintech and how that has almost been exacerbated by the pandemic. And I just want to get your take on how the pandemic has really shaped the innovations that we're seeing in the industry today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what the pandemic did was in many ways forced digitalization on many segments. I think the SME segment that I've been focused on for my fintech journey is a good example, actually. One of the frustrating things about being a fintech founder in the SME segment is the SMEs didn't quite want to digitalize at the pace that we all expected them to. We had an expectation that the behaviours that people had learnt as consumers, business owners would then take across to running their businesses. But it actually took longer than we expected. Of course, the pandemic had a huge impact on that because suddenly it was impossible to do things the old way. So, for example, physically signing a contract, an incredibly painful thing to do, to print out a 50-page contract, to scan it after you've signed it. But people were kept doing that stuff until the pandemic made it literally impossible. Once you've tried e-signature, you're never going to go back. You never want to do what you did before, especially if you're trying to sign them at home, as I've had to do a few times. And I think we've also seen that in more core fintech areas, for example, in payments. Again, SMEs are surprisingly heavy users of branches, of checks. Those sort of traditional, financial services, which really are looking very obsolete now post-pandemic. Again, you've seen a phenomenon where businesses have been kind of forced by the circumstances to actually begin to do more digital payments, to bank without their branches. But again, once you've done it, you don't go back because it is dramatically easier, especially with the quality of modern technology. So I think the pandemic has led to a sort of acceleration of fintech adoption, which is exciting for all of us.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and it's really sort of brought a necessity to fintech that the industry didn't have before, which is really exciting, and it's really shaping and leading to new entrants into the market. You did touch on this just briefly in your other answer, but I'd love to expand upon it. Is what payment models are you most excited to see right now?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, let's talk about what are payments. Payments are kind of the base layer of all fintech. I think it's an important point to make. So in lending, for example, what are we doing when we decide whether to lend to a person or whether to lend to a business? We're actually looking at their underlying payments. Yeah, it is the most base layer of fintech. And for that reason, it's kind of, that would explain why we're seeing such enormous valuations and enormous interest in payments as a segment. I would make the observation that in the last 10 years or so, we've seen some fantastic innovation around making it easier to use payments as an end user, partially as a consumer, but actually in particular, if you're a merchant, for example, that wants to accept payments, you still occasionally end up at websites of small businesses that haven't discovered the modern fintech providers, where it's impossibly hard to make a payment and you're not sure if it's even safe. There's been amazing innovation in terms of that sort of final mile of payments, where it's a lot easier for users to use payments. But the reality is the underlying infrastructure remains very fragile and very antiquated. And I think there's been an element to date of lipstick on a pig, I think, and some amazing digital lipstick, let's be clear, but it's still lipstick on a pig. It's a depressing fact that even in the most advanced financial services locations around the world, it is still very common for instant payments to be a premium service that you have to pay for, right? Instant payments has been technically possible now for decades, but it remains in many markets a norm to actually, to wait days to get your payments to come through, as if they're sending it in the mail, right? So what does that tell us? I think we're now in the second phase of payments innovation, where people are beginning to actually attack that sort of really core infrastructure. Okay. Or the payments rails, as a cool, if I was a cool VC, would call it the payments rails. So we're really seeing that, and I think there's kind of three interesting areas there. I don't see a single winner between these, by the way. I think there's an element of horses for courses. So let me go through those in turn. Firstly, regulators in many of the advanced economies around the world have begun to mandate stuff like faster payments in the UK. So in other words, they're forcing the banks to stop making it so difficult to do payments instantaneously, quickly, cleanly, and cheaply. So faster payments types initiatives around the world, I think, is kind of area number one of interest. Area number two is open banking. So open banking, particularly when it's driven by regulators, as it has been in the European Union and the UK, allows you to do instant payments between accounts and effectively for free. I think that's really, really interesting, and we're just seeing, certainly in the UK, the maturity of that technology, the ease of use is getting to the point, and the predictability is getting to the point where it's actually becoming a real opportunity. So open banking, I think, is a really interesting area of payments, particularly for larger payments. And then the final area, I would be remiss to not talk about it, would be blockchain. And blockchain, of course, allows you to do properly instantaneous, properly safe and secure, immutable payments. We're clearly in the very early stages of that, and I think you have to be an enthusiast at the moment to be doing that. In other words, you actually have to be interested in discovering what a wallet is, digital wallet, for example. Yeah. But I'm old enough to remember the early days of the internet. I was coming out of university in the early days of the internet, and there was a time when only enthusiasts understood the internet. So it's just a matter of time before that becomes so easy to use. And I'm particularly interested in blockchain type or DLT technologies, particularly in terms of what I call micropayments. So what if, for example, every time you listen to a song, rather than an estimate going to Spotify, what if every single one was a micropayment? I think blockchain and DLT will make that possible. So I think really interesting area, and I think the valuations and the interest in the sector is well warranted. It's an enormous sector that still feels quite antiquated at the back end.
You've touched on a lot of really interesting subjects there, Conrad, and especially about the rise of the blockchain and how regulation is shaping the future. In terms of that sort of avenue of discussion, you mentioned it slightly, but I was wondering how the UK can position itself to continue to be a leader in the fintech space.
Yeah, well, firstly, we should compliment the UK regulator, because actually through two phases of fintech innovation, they've really made amazing strides to actually keep the UK at the forefront of financial services, which for us is an extraordinarily important part of our economy. The City of London, as we'd call it as Londoners, is a really key part of our tax base. It means that we can all afford to have free hospitals. So they've done an amazing job, I think, through two waves. Firstly, in the early days of fintech, they had fintech incubator sandboxes. They were quite ahead of the curve. And for example, some of the earliest regulation around peer-to-peer lending came out of the UK and was copied around the world. So there was kind of generation one, great efforts. Generation two is open banking, where that was actually mandated by the European Union when we were still part of the European Union, but the UK regulators did an amazing job, yeah. There are parts of the European Union where the banks are doing it very unwillingly, very poorly, APIs that look like they're from last century, frankly. We have a modern infrastructure, we're really getting there. What's next? Well, it has to be blockchain, it has to be DLT. And I do think that we're at risk of not being on the forefront this time. And I think I'd really like to see some movement there. The US has just announced some sort of foundational ideas about how they're going to regulate and manage crypto, centralized currencies, etc. I think we need to get on the front foot. You know, we're good at this stuff, but we don't quite feel like we're on the front foot right now. You know, if I was a regulator, I'd be thinking this stuff is going to happen anyway. Right? You may have concerns about it, but it's going to happen anyway. So why don't we make sure that it happens in our backyard, not someone else's?
Definitely. I mean, we would hate to be overtaken by the Americans of all people. So I think it's really up to the leaders of the space and the people who are working on the ground in the industry to really push that forward. But I totally agree with all of the points that you've raised today, and I think your panel that you're going to be hosting later is going to be really, really interesting, and I look forward to hearing your ideas on that. Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure.
And I hope you enjoyed day two of the summit.
I'm sure I'm going to do some royal spotting now.
Oh, brilliant, yeah. Get our binoculars out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.